Treasure hunting mice were known across the continent for their unmatched ability to locate precious items, and their value in secret realms was immeasurable. She said she would be willing to buy it at any price, even suggesting he skip going to the Martial Pavilion to sell it, promising to handle the entire transaction herself. Purple immediately let out a tiny whimper, his ears drooping as he clung to Ye Tian's sleeve, silently begging not to be sold. His little eyes shimmered with tears, and he trembled in fear, expecting to be exchanged for gold or pills like a common object. Ye Tian looked at the mouse in his hand, then back at Yue Ling. He apologized and told her gently that Purple wasn't for sale. He was his spiritual pet. Yue Ling smiled softly and said she understood. No one in their right mind would sell something so valuable, and clearly, Ye Tian wasn't a fool. After a while, they arrived at the apartments where Ye Yu was staying. The building looked quiet, tucked away in a peaceful corner of the city. Ye Tian stopped at the foot of the stairs and turned to Yue Ling, asking if she wasn't going to come up. She shook her head and told him that it had been a long time since the siblings had time alone together, so it would be better for her to stay back and not intrude on their reunion. Before leaving, she promised to send someone from the Martial Pavilion the next day to collect the items he had obtained from the secret realm. He stepped forward and knocked on the apartment door, calling out to Ye Yu and asking her to open it for her brother. A few moments later, the door creaked open, revealing Ye Yu's annoyed face. She gave him a cold stare before slamming the door shut again, completely shocking Ye Tian. He blinked, then knocked again, reminding her that he was her older brother and asking what she was doing. From behind the door, Ye Yu's voice rose in frustration as she yelled that he had no right to act like a brother now. Since they had arrived in the city, he had disappeared to the secret realm without a word, leaving her alone to fend for herself in a completely unfamiliar place. Ye Tian sighed and apologized through the door, admitting that he realized it was his fault. But Ye Yu didn't respond positively. She told him to stay outside and never come back. Her voice trembled not from anger but from hurt. Ye Tian paused for a moment, considering her words, then thought of something. Without saying anything more, he activated his spatial teleportation ability and disappeared in a flicker of light, only to reappear inside the apartment a moment later. Ye Yu let out a loud shriek at the sudden intrusion. He calmly explained the ability to her, trying to ease the tension. Then, with a smile, he pulled Purple from his pocket and handed him to her as a gift. Ye Yu took the mouse, her expression softening as she held it in her palms. She smiled quietly and remarked that it was indeed unique. Ye Tian nodded and said that the mouse was now hers to take care of. Just as things were beginning to calm down, Jin, the spirit cat, emerged from one of the rooms. He looked at Purple with a sulking expression and muttered about Ye Tian getting another pet. His eyes narrowed at the little mouse's round belly, clearly unimpressed. He poked it and commented on how fat it was, questioning how it could ever hope to fight in its current state. Purple shrunk back, clearly intimidated, while Jin puffed up his chest and declared himself the boss from now on. Later that night, Ye Tian stepped into the shower and let the warm water run over his tired body. The events of the past few days spun through his thoughts as he leaned against the tiled wall. He knew that Purple would be happier and safer with Ye Yu. She needed something to keep her company, and Purple's personality was oddly compatible with hers. After drying off, he wrapped a towel around himself and sat on the bed, muttering to himself that he would begin copying Purple's treasure hunting talent now. If he could combine it with the other abilities he had copied so far, he would gain another edge against the danger surrounding him. By the end of the night, Ye Tian had successfully copied the high-tier treasure hunting talent, which now joined the ranks of the other powerful abilities he had obtained. Meanwhile, at the Yun family mansion, tension hung in the air like a thundercloud. The silver-haired girl flinched, trembling where she knelt on the floor. He shouted at her, calling her useless and trash, his voice booming as he demanded to know how such a simple mission could end in failure. Her voice shook as she tried to explain that she had been tricked. She told him someone had taken advantage of her while she was distracted during the battle with the Calamity Beast. In that moment, an unknown individual had managed to steal not just the Vitality Core, but all the surrounding Vitality Stones as well. The ancestor's eyes narrowed as he asked if she had at least seen the person. She lowered her head even more and admitted that the man's speed was unbelievable. She hadn't even been able to confront him directly, and by the time she realized what had happened, he was already gone. Enraged, the ancestor screamed again, accusing her of being blind and incompetent. He roared that she hadn't even been able to confirm the thief's gender. Stepping forward with his face twisted in anger, he grabbed her by the hair and yanked her head up, snarling as he asked how she could still call herself the Demon Sea Base's #1 genius among the younger generation after delivering such disgraceful results. He asked her if she truly believed she still deserved to be alive or remain at his side. The girl gasped, fear flooding her eyes, and immediately begged for another chance. She insisted she would find the Vitality Stones no matter what. After a long moment, he released her and pushed her aside. He muttered that the thief might be someone from a major family, given the boldness it took to steal from the Yun family. He ordered her to start investigating which noble families had sent their disciples into the secret realm, and warned her that if she failed again, the punishment would be far worse. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the hall. The next morning arrived with a calmer breeze. Ye Tian and Yue Ling stood outside the Martial Pavilion headquarters, the enormous building towering above them like a monument of power and authority. Yue Ling warned him in advance not to be too surprised at the scale of it all. Ye Tian nodded silently, though his thoughts were elsewhere. Now that he had copied Purple's talent, this was the perfect place to put it to use. Inside a structure filled with rare and ancient items, the treasure hunting ability would serve as a sixth sense to guide him toward the most valuable finds. The hall inside was spacious and filled with display cases, each glowing faintly with spiritual energy. Rows of weapons, pills, books, and artifacts lined the area, neatly organized in tiers and sections. Ye Ling mentioned casually that he could even try out the items if he wished. Ye Tian browsed through them quietly, scanning each one while letting his newly gained treasure hunting sense awaken. He took note of the colors, their glow, and the quality. Blue glows indicated mid-tier treasures, and there were many of those. He picked up one of the blue-colored swords and weighed it in his hand. At first glance, it looked fine, but the moment he pressed its edge against a training dummy, it chipped slightly. Alarmed, he quickly placed it back on the rack before anyone could notice the flaw. Just then, an older man stepped out from the side corridor. Yue Ling greeted him right away and introduced him as her uncle, the man in charge of the Martial Pavilion's marketplace. He nodded at her with a warm smile and then turned to Ye Tian, introducing himself with polite formality. Welcoming Ye Tian with surprising warmth, he told him to take his time looking around and even offered a discount if anything caught his eye. Ye Tian gave a respectful nod and continued browsing. Then, out of nowhere, a strange scent struck his senses. It was distinct, golden, powerful, and pure. His treasure hunting talent lit up immediately, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. His eyes snapped toward the source of the signal. In the far corner of the hall, tucked away almost too neatly, sat a small glass case. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, but Ye Tian's instincts zeroed in on it. The name etched beneath it read, Heavenly Warrior, Blood Dragon. Yue Ling smacked Ye Tian on the shoulder, snapping him out of his daze. He blinked, realizing he had zoned out again, and quietly apologized, admitting he'd been lost in thought. She narrowed her eyes, half amused and half concerned, and told him to hurry up with his choices since her uncle was a busy man. Ye Tian gave a small nod and turned to Elder Yue, boldly stating that most of the items on display were low-ranked, and that he was looking for something more valuable, something fitting for someone with his needs. He added that money wouldn't be a problem. Elder Yue let out a hearty laugh at the boy's confidence, clearly entertained. Yue Ling, standing beside them, murmured under her breath, wondering when Ye Tian had learned to bluff so smoothly. Elder Yue reassured him that the Martial Pavilion had everything, natural treasures, cultivation techniques, and even transcendent tier divine weapons, and as long as Ye Tian had the funds, he could get anything he needed. Without hesitation, Ye Tian reached into his storage and pulled out a shimmering vitality stone, holding it up for the elder to see. Elder Yue's eyes widened in surprise and admiration, praising the stone and emphasizing just how rare it truly was. Yue Ling, just as stunned, immediately asked where Ye Tian had managed to acquire such a treasure. He scratched the back of his neck and answered casually that he'd gotten lucky and found it in the secret realm. Elder Yue, clearly intrigued, asked what he was hoping to exchange for it. Ye Tian explained that he was looking for a high-tier cultivation technique, one that would let him grow all the way to the Grand Master realm, and a weapon similar to a short sword. Elder Yue beamed and nodded enthusiastically, confirming that just one vitality stone was enough to cover those requests. Ye Tian found it a little unbelievable that a single stone held so much value and couldn't help but wonder just how priceless the entire vitality stone core in his storage must be. Before he could fully process it, Yue Ling suddenly stepped close, cornering him with a sharp look. She demanded to know where he really got the vitality stone from. Her intuition told her he was hiding something, and Ye Tian could only look away. He told her, almost guiltily, that telling her the truth might put her in a dangerous position. That only made her more upset, and she insisted on knowing. Eventually, he confessed. He told her he had stolen the stones from the Yun family. Her mouth dropped open in sheer disbelief. She immediately raised her voice, exclaiming that he must have lost his mind. The Yun family had been guarding that treasure for ages. She suggested returning the stone immediately, maybe even begging the ancestor for mercy. She asked, half panicked, how many stones he had taken. Ye Tian replied in a low voice that he had obtained a mine's worth of vitality stones and stored them in his spatial inventory. Yue Ling's legs gave out slightly as she slumped onto a nearby bench, holding her head in her hands. She murmured to herself, saying they were doomed for sure. The Yun family was bound to investigate, and once they connected the dots, she feared the consequences for both of them. Ye Tian, trying to be reassuring, told her he'd made sure to cover his tracks completely. He didn't believe there was any way the Yun family would trace the theft back to them. She warned him in a trembling voice that the ancestor of the Yun family was someone no one could afford to offend. He wasn't the type to forget or forgive such humiliation. She added that if anything happened, Ye Tian better not blame her. Despite her sternness, her concern was clear. While they were talking, Ye Tian's eyes wandered across the shop. Something golden glimmered faintly on one of the shelves, and intrigued, he walked over and reached for it. Elder Yue soon returned with the requested items, the purple cloud body refining technique, and a short sword that once belonged to a monarch-level expert. The technique was known for strengthening the practitioner's physique to a formidable level, and the sword was said to have been recovered from the grave of a forgotten monarch, surrounded by treasures. Ye Tian held the sword, examining it with a practiced eye. Activating his copied talent to identify hidden strengths, he confirmed its apex tier classification. The weapon hummed softly in his grip, pulsing with latent energy. It felt right. He nodded and accepted both the sword and the manual, placing them into his spatial storage with satisfaction. Elder Yue, clearly pleased with the transaction, handed him a black and gold VIP card embedded with shimmering runes. He explained that the card would allow Ye Tian free access to all Martial Pavilion branches, and grant him a generous 70% discount on all items. It was a mark of both respect and investment. Ye Tian then asked about the golden item he had seen earlier. Elder Yue followed his gaze with a smile, walked over to the shelf, and picked up the object. It was a red gold egg, resting in a protective casing. He told Ye Tian that it was a fossilized dragon egg, once sold to their pavilion by a wandering cultivator. The pavilion had tried countless methods to hatch it, but none had worked, so it had ended up as a decorative piece. Given Ye Tian's contributions today, the elder decided to gift it to him for free. The gesture surprised Ye Tian, and he asked why he was receiving a transcendent tier treasure so easily. Yue Ling responded before the elder could, explaining that the egg was no longer considered useful. However, she also hinted that the pavilion hoped Ye Tian would keep bringing rare treasures like vitality stones their way. Ye Tian took a closer look at the dragon egg. Despite what the others believed, his treasure hunting talent had identified it as a high-tier item, which meant it still held potential. He could feel something faintly pulsing inside, something ancient and powerful. He realized it wasn't defective, it had simply chosen not to hatch yet. A quiet determination rose within him. Ye Tian, calm as ever, gestures toward the modest path leading up to his home. With the subtlety of someone who rarely asks for company, he offers her a chance to join him for a meal, mentioning that Ye Yu, his sister, is an excellent cook. Yue Chao, standing at the gate like a sentinel of misplaced pride, had intercepted them with venom in his words. He had accused Ye Tian of scavenging and collecting pitiful remnants by slaying weak beasts. His insults were sharp, but his intent was sharper. Without waiting for a response, Yue Chao had launched into an attack. All of his energy had been poured into a single strike, aimed to overpower and humiliate Ye Tian. Yet, what followed was not the display of dominance Yue Chao had expected. Ye Tian, with a calm steadiness that bordered on eerie, raised a single hand, one hand against all of Yue Chao's might. The clash ended before it truly began. Yue Chao's full force, driven by pride and fury, could not push Ye Tian back even a step. It was like trying to move a mountain with a breath of wind. Shock had painted itself across Yue Chao's face, disbelief draining the color from his cheeks. For a moment, he saw not Ye Tian the disgrace, but something far more formidable, something terrifying. Wei Ling had seen it too. She had stepped forward then, her voice rising to cut through the tension. She had called for restraint, reminded them where they were and what consequences might follow. Her words hung heavily in the air. For a moment, even Ye Tian's gaze softened, tempered by her plea. In the silence that followed, Ye Tian had acknowledged her intervention. He had not spoken much, but the appreciation was evident. She had understood then that he was not merely gathering scraps. He was walking a road far different from the one others assumed. Back in the present, Ye Tian made his way toward his home. Inside, the home was quiet and warm. The scent of home-cooked food lingered in every corner. Ye Yu, ever the dutiful sister, stood at the stove, working with practiced hands. Without a word, Ye Tian slipped into his seat, soaking in the peaceful domesticity. As the meal cooked, he reached into his inventory and pulled out a peculiar object wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing the dragon egg. As the dragon egg stirred again in his hands, Ye Tian's heart skipped a beat. The motion wasn't random this time. It was subtle, rhythmic, like a pulse. He leaned in, holding it closer to his chest. A heartbeat. A faint but unmistakable heartbeat. The realization washed over him like cold water. Suddenly, his small black cat, Little Jin, bolted from the edge of the bed where it had been curled up. Startled, the cat leapt to the floor and began darting wildly around the room, eyes wide and tail fluffed in panic. A soft voice chimed from his side. It was Little Purple, his tiny, ever-curious treasure-hunting mouse. The little beast blinked up at him, clearly unsettled. The question came innocently. Why exactly did Ye Tian have a dragon egg in his possession? Ye Tian replied in thought, recalling how he had picked it up from a group of rogue cultivators who were discarding it, claiming it had no value. Little Purple, after studying the egg, commented with an unusual level of seriousness. Dragon eggs, he explained, carry an innate aura of dominance. Even in slumber, they exude pressure, an instinctual warning that triggers fear in lesser creatures. This presence was not ordinary. It was tied to the hierarchy of beasts, and dragons, it seemed, stood